So our webinar today is about wind power and public engagement, cooperatives and community ownership. The speaker is Giuseppe Masini from the Department of Psychology, and we have our discussant Sigurd Lundheim from the Department of Sociology and Political Science. So now I would like to give the word to you, Giuseppe.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending today's seminar. And just a couple of words to introduce myself. I work in the Department of Sociology in the Citizens, Environment and Safety Research Group. Currently, my research is about energy social innovations in the Smarties Energy 2020 project, the Smarties project. But before, I've been conducting research on social acceptability of wind farms during my PhD. And I've been a researcher more in general social aspect of energy consumption in buildings when I was in the United Kingdom. More recently, I have developed instead an interest and research strand in energy justice issues. Okay, so today I'm going to share now my screen. Hold on a second. I'm going to talk about some research that I have conducted during my PhD and that I have published on in a book that was came out last year, and that is exactly about wind power and public engagement, cooperatives and community ownership. It's a book published by Routledge. And of course, you're more than welcome to ask me a copy of the chapters if you're interested to read more about this research. So let's see if I can. Okay. Seem to have a problem with my slides now. Excuse me. I think I need to restart my slides, sorry. Typical problems with Zoom. We tried it before and everything worked fine, but apparently not now. Okay. I trust that you can all see the first slide. Can you confirm, please?
We see a Word document right now.
A Word document, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Can you see
there,
the slide?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now.
Okay, excellent. So, social acceptability of wind farms is certainly something that is quite topical at the moment. We all talk a lot about the energy transition, and the energy transition is clearly something that is founded not only on policies that should move forward the transition, but is also founded on the social acceptance that all the changes that the transition will bring might have. And in this respect, theories of social acceptability are really important right now. In this case, I'm going to outline a little bit the hypothesis of this study, and then I will talk about some British cases that I looked at during my PhD. Then I will clearly present some results and briefly some conclusions. So, well, there's not much to say about the energy transition that you already don't know, but what makes sense to point at is that a huge investment is required in the coming years at least after what is the result of a research from IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency. So between 2015 and 2050, a cumulative investment is needed in energy supply and demand assets of 157 trillion of USD dollars. Much of this investment will go towards renewable energy, of course. So the fact that renewables in all their shape and forms are accepted in our environment is something very important. We try to focus a little bit on the social aspects of a just transition in a paper that we recently published. And we considered 4 major social aspects of the transition as something that policy research should focus on. And one is the intergenerational justice issue, vulnerability and energy transition. So how some individuals might be more affected than others by the transition. The transformation of the social imaginary of places, and so how our environment, the environment in which we live, is going to change thanks to this energy transition, and possibly also how we can compensate for the presence of energy infrastructure that might be considered penalizing for individuals that live close to it. So at least 3 of these, I'd say all 4 of them are relevant when we talk about wind farms. So which kind of environment are we going to live for the future generations? Are wind farms going to be placed in mostly in disadvantaged close to disadvantaged communities, like it has happened for fossil fuels power plants, or should be instead evenly distributed in our environment across different types of communities? How is this going to transform the perception of the environment in which we live in? And does it make sense to think about compensating communities to make them more susceptible to accept wind farms? Well, clearly, social acceptability is just one element when we think about planning and wind farms, as Tok pointed out in one of his papers. There are several elements that influence wind farm developments. One is a favorable planning system. Systems of financial support are very important. The presence of and strength of landscape protection organizations, and this deals really more closely to social acceptability. But also the patterns, he pointed also to the fact that patterns of ownership, and particularly local ownership, could influence social acceptance of wind farms. He referred particularly to the Danish case. You know better than me, being Scandinavian, well, many of you at least, that Denmark has developed wind farms for a long time, and that they often use it, at least in the first couple of decades of these developments, the cooperative scheme of ownership, and this, in the opinion of Tok, favored the social acceptance of wind farms. So this was something that I thought was quite interesting to research about in the British case. Back then I was a research student at Hereford University in Scotland. And in the United Kingdom, actually, despite having a large proportion of citizens supporting wind farms, we could notice a sort of value action gap, which is to say that many people, despite having pro-environmental attitudes and favorable attitudes towards wind farms, were objecting the presence of wind farms in their local area. So I thought that a way to interpret this could be the so-called low-cost hypothesis, outlined by Ekman and President Norfer in a paper of 2003. These authors suggest that people refrain from following their pro-environmental attitudes in so-called high-cost situations. So the question that I was posing myself, could we consider wind farms in our local area a sort of high-cost situation, a situation in which, despite us being maybe in favor of wind farms more generally, and renewable energy and fighting against climate change, we think that the costs that we are going to bear as individuals having the wind farms in our local area are unbearable, and these costs override the benefits that we see for the society at large. So essentially, this was a little bit a research question guiding the research that I carried out. Is it possible to change this perception from high cost to low cost situation? For example, if we have direct benefits that could be delivered to the local community in the forms of community benefits funds, or the revenue coming from the wind farms delivered through a community ownership scheme, could be this transforming the perception of the situation towards a low-cost situation. Would then people be more supportive towards the wind farm in that case? And what are the roles of other variables in terms of social acceptability? For example, what's the role of wealth and the location? If an individual is wealthier, is he equally supportive towards a wind farm in the local area or not? And how much does affect support being having, let's say, your own house close to the designated site for the wind farm? So wind farm cooperatives, I mean, I have already anticipated these questions in the earlier slide, really. Can they shift consensus? Can they swing consensus? And community funds, what are the differences? Well, community funds are often, at least in the British policy environment, those are funds that are set up by commercial developers to deliver benefits to the whole community that lives in the area affected by the wind farm. So there is a large difference in this respect in comparison with the wind farm cooperatives, because to get most of the benefits of wind farm cooperatives, individuals have to join the cooperative. They have to make an investment, big or small that it might be. And in that case, they will get a revenue. They will, of course, have also voting rights and voice in the governance of the cooperative. Cooperatives also set up often community funds, so they try also to generalize the benefits to the whole community. But of course, there is a little bit of a difference in that community funds created by commercial developers might be more far-reaching than those created by perhaps a local cooperative. There are also community trusts, which are another type of way to deliver benefits to the local community, although they are less used in the United Kingdom, but still they are becoming more common in recent years. In those cases, the developer might donate some shares of the development to the community trust, or even the ownership of one of the wind turbines, for example. And in that case, the community can use the revenue through the trust for local projects that might benefit the community. So I developed a theoretical framework looking at social acceptability, which was bringing together different types of variables. and particularly variables related with the context in which the project was developing. So we could talk of procedural justice, how people were approached, were they given enough information, were they provided with the opportunity to participate, did this deliver, this build some trust within the community, was there trust towards the proponents of the community, how this could influence the acceptability. Well, I've already mentioned community benefits, the cooperative schemes. I consider the personal resources, so the socioeconomic status of individuals, their knowledge of wind energy and more generally of renewable energy, the level of education, how close they were to the the designated wind farm site, and eventually psychological variables. So what was their perception of the cost and benefits related with the wind farm developments? Did they have pro-environmental attitudes? Did they display place attachment attitudes or not? I thought that these variables would interplay and they would influence an evaluation of perceived cost and benefits, eventually leading to a behavior intention of supporting or opposing the wind farm, and also joining or not the wind farm cooperative. I looked at as a first case West Mill wind farm. Back then was the first community, or had the ambition to be the first 100% community-owned wind farm cooperative in the UK. Was it really? Well, quite, I'd say, in the sense that they also benefited of an investment of a large cooperative that was based in the area. So not all the shares of West Mill Wind Farm were ultimately owned by single citizens or residents, but there was at least a large cooperative business that was that had joined the scheme. It started like a single person application, so it was a little bit peculiar in a way. Then he shifted the application. He's a farmer living in the area, Adam Twine, and he later decided that he wanted to socialize the project. So instead of making a wind farm on his own land, he wanted to make it a community wind farm. The area is a wealthy area in Oxfordshire, beautiful countryside actually, in the Vale of the White Horse. And there was a strong opposition and a deeply divided community when I visited the area to carry out some interviews. Back then I interviewed stakeholders of the project, so local politicians, members of the support group, and members of the opposition group. I interviewed the farmer who started all the project, and also I interviewed some representatives of third-party organizations that supported or opposed the project. I remember interviewing members of Friends of the Earth, members of a local energy agency, and members of an organization, the National Trust, which was protecting natural environment and the heritage of the environment in the UK. Well, just to give you a short taste of the type of answers that I got, this was a quote from one of the respondents, a member of the opposition group, and she was talking about wind farms that she saw in another area, and she said, "I've been to see this." She visited this wind farm to gather an impression of the place. And she said, I've been to see these big ones and I know what it does, not only visually, but the noise. It's the whole thing. It says it doesn't matter what impact we have on this landscape. And it does matter instead for people's hearts and minds. It does matter. And in their own attitude to their own landscape. So she was really displaying a strong, I would say, place attachment to the place that she was living in, and she thought that the place would have been spoiled by the wind farms. She was pointing, of course, to the visual impact, the noise, and clearly there was a sense of bitterness and a sense of also being a sort of a local environmentalist. She described herself in that way, who was opposing instead other type of environmentalists, like Adam Twine, the man that you see in the picture, who was instead, let's call him a global environmentalist, a person that was active in the Green Party in the United Kingdom, who was very much concerned about climate change. He was an organic farmer, but clearly he had another vision of what were the environmental priorities in the place of Westmill. So he thought that climate change should have the priority, while others instead thought that the protection of the local environment needed to be prioritized. Well, in this case, trust was a very important aspect of the wind farm debate, because as they saw this an initiative of Adam Twine, many suspected that actually the wind farm was created to benefit the farmer who started this project specifically. So they didn't quite believe him when he decided to make of it a community project. The community ownership was introduced at a later stage, as I said earlier. And this, when actually he faced some resistance in the local authority. And this, I think, is a good lesson, because it shows that when you want to create a community energy project, you need to find the right way to inform the local community, to create a process of involvement since the beginning, socializing immediately this purpose instead of introducing it later, because then many people will think that it's just a trick, an escamotage, a way to win the consensus of the people. There was a concern about the health effects of the wind farm, which I found surprising, but many people, many of the interviewees, at least the opposers, thought that really the wind farm would have created a worse environment. They cited issues like low frequency noise that they thought would have affected the health of the local community. The woman that I mentioned before was also involved in a voluntary organization helping children with autism, and she thought that this would have created an unbearable environment for autistic children that she was caring for. I've already mentioned how place attachment appeared to be an issue motivating opposition. The community was also wealthy. This was pointed by several interviewees. Two of them were councillors of the local area, and one of them said clearly that the community was so wealthy that they would have not cared less for the revenue produced by the community cooperative. While another councillor said to me that he thought that the revenue was possibly a good thing, but he also thought that was not relevant for the local area, and he suggested that being himself an Irishman coming from Northern Ireland, they said, well, actually, if you would place a wind farm like this in the cooperative in the area where I come from, then you could realize that there would be an interest towards this type of development, because people are poorer and they might see in that an economic opportunity. So there was a deep divide in the community, and what was pointed by several interviewees is that the cooperative risked to become a permanent divide. So with people that would have joined the community and people who would have stayed out, and this would have continued with time, because of course the cooperative would have been there, the wind farm would have been there, community cooperative meetings would have been held, maybe events related with the cooperative, and so this sort of permanent divide was a risk for the community. This is what they thought, at least. I carried on my research after the interviews, conducting a survey in Scotland, and particularly looking at 4 proposed wind farms cooperatives, 2 cooperative schemes, and 2 commercial schemes with which also offered a community fund. 2 were comparably in wealthier areas, and 2 instead in the private areas. I thought that Scotland was particularly interesting. Scotland has the largest amount of wind resources in the whole United Kingdom, is already exporting renewable electricity produced towards England, and really the vast majority of potential in terms of wind energy production is Scotland, although it's quite significant also in the rest of the United Kingdom. So I chose these 4 cases, 2 of them in Aberdeenshire, 1 in North Lanarkshire, and the other one in the island. They had quite different statistical indexes of multiple deprivation. As you can see, Bracco was the most deprived, while Kushney and Meklikariwi were relatively more affluent. Nig was a little bit in between, although not that deprived, to be honest. Well, if we look at the incomes, we can see, for example, that in the area of Bracco, nearly 30% of the people most likely were on benefits, or anyway were on part-time jobs. They were earning less than £10,000 per year. So that would be what 13,000 euros, more or less. So 130,000 Norwegian kroner in a year. And instead, in Kushney and Meklikariwi, the situation was different. Particularly in Meklikariwi, there was 23% of people that had an income of 80,000 or more pounds per year. I surveyed 1,000, well, I addressed my postal survey to 1,000 households, which were randomly selected using the Royal Mail postal file. I selected 250 of them living close to each site, and half of these, so 125 for each case, were in the distance band of 0 to 5 kilometers, and the other 125 in the distance band of 5 to 10 kilometers. I did 3 mailing phases. The first 2 with, well, the first one with a questionnaire. The second was a letter of asking for, soliciting for an answer, and a third mailing in which I again posted the questionnaire and asked for a final time for that to be returned. I didn't get an amazing return rate, 31%, but wasn't even too bad, considering that there has been a steep decline in response rates of postal surveys in the United Kingdom and more in general in Western countries in recent years. But there was a huge variety. As you can see, in the area of Bracco, there was only 17% of return rate, while in Kushni was 44%, nearly 45%. And the reason, I suspect, was that being a severely deprived area, Bracco, it is a well-known fact that these sort of areas are more difficult in terms of engagement of residents in surveys and in other type of initiatives. So looking at briefly now at what were the variables that seemed to impact the most the opinion of towards the wind farm, I carried out a number of non-parametric correlations using mostly Kendall-Stowe tests, and well, the variable that appeared to affect the most the opinion about the locally proposed wind farm was this scale that I built with the various items of that included regarding different aspects of the wind farms, and so was the value that people gave to the benefits and costs related with the presence of the wind farms, and local benefits and disadvantages. So their perception of the magnitude of local benefits and disadvantages. But being more specific, the variables that affected the most them all was trust towards the developer. I mean, the single item that affected the most the opinion. So trust appeared to have a significant role in shaping the opinion of respondents, and also the landscape impact that the wind farm would have had locally, together with the health concerns. It was to be expected, and so was to be expected that those that opposed the wind farm would have also opposed the cooperative scheme. There were instead weak correlations regarding the family income per person. It wasn't particularly significant in determining the opinion towards the wind farm, and similarly, attitudinal items didn't seem to correlate that much with the opinion about the locally proposed wind farms. Both place attachment and sort of an item that I had created to gauge pro-environmentals towards, let's say, pro-economy values. They both had a low coefficient of correlation with the opinion about the locally proposed wind farm. When I look at instead with an ordinary regression, I carried out also a number of ordinary and logistic regressions. When I look at an ordinary regression, through an ordinary regression about the opinion regarding the cooperative scheme, again, it was a trust variable that seemed to influence the most the opinion about the cooperative scheme, and particularly the belief that the cooperative scheme was a ploy, that was a way to win the consensus of people. To a lesser extent, also the belief that the revenue of the cooperative would have benefited the community, and that the cooperative would have instead offered the worst compensation for the community, had an influence in the opinion towards the cooperative scheme. And even to a lesser extent, the fact that the cooperative would have strengthened the social capital in the area. If we look instead at some specific questions that I posed, for example, all in all, what do you think of a community cooperative wind farm cooperative? Well, a good number of individuals said actually that was either a good idea or an excellent idea. Even though a large number of people said that a fairly large number of people said that they were not able to afford the shares. And this was quite significant in my opinion, because with a cooperative scheme, we need always to bear in mind that some people will be left out. So is this the way to push forward a socially inclusive community ownership model? Or perhaps we should consider the possibility of other type of models of community ownership. So a few conclusions. Well, first of all, social acceptability is a key aspect, of course, on the energy transition, as I pointed out earlier. So we should keep thinking what might favor social acceptability, whether the community ownership might have an impact on social acceptability. I personally believe it has. I personally believe that is also a way to make the energy transition more just. But perhaps the community cooperative scheme is one of the schemes that we can use, but there are other schemes that we could consider, like, for example, the community trusts with developers donating to the local community a part of the ownership of the wind farm. So in this respect, we could talk of a sort of compensation that is given to the local community to host the wind farms. Is this a good way to fill the value action gap between pro-environmental attitudes, pro-renewables, and the support for a local wind farm? I'm not sure of that. I think that it depends a lot on the type of local community that we are facing. I think that is possibly true that communities that are more deprived might see an opportunity of development in wind farms. Other communities which are wealthier might think that instead the wind farm is just something that is going to spoil the beauty of their environment, or even depreciating the property values that they hold. So they might. There might be different responses in different environments. Certainly what would benefit filling this value action gap would be to have a better communication and a trust building exercise that is based on procedural fairness or procedural justice elements. So having a sort of formalized environment in which individuals have the right to be informed, have the right to be involved in a process of discussion about the development. And this in some environments is not yet present. I don't know about planning regulations here in Norway. It might be the case that it is. In the United Kingdom, it seemed to be that many of these developments were going over the top of people before that they could even realize. So the cooperative scheme and the community funds are not a silver bullet to facilitate social acceptance, but they could help. And I think that it makes sense to research further these schemes to understand whether we can facilitate more acceptance of wind farms, considering that they could play a very important role in the energy transition. Well, thank you. And if you have any questions, please come forward.
Thank you for a really interesting presentation. And I think many things to consider also in the Norwegian discussion on wind power. I would first like to give the word to Sigurd for some comments before we open for a general discussion.
Thank you, Sarah. To say this is a very interesting presentation. I think it does raise a lot of important questions, and also I do have your book, which I do recommend. It's a nice springboard for further research, especially the final conclusions chapter. I guess I have some questions regarding the perceived fairness of sort of having a formalized compensation scheme for wind energy. I guess in more wealthy areas, as you mentioned, a flat compensation fee might not go as far as it would in a more disadvantaged area. And also, when it comes to disadvantaged communities, I'm wondering what you think about them being maybe sort of overrun by the developers. So the developers say, no, we don't want to share the revenue from the wind farm, and the disadvantaged community might not have the resources to sort of fight the developer on that front. I was wondering if you have any thoughts surrounding that. If there are any ways to increase the, I guess, inclusion and justice for everyone.
Well, I think that two things. Well, first of all, you said, are developers willing to share the revenue from wind farm development? Well, in the United Kingdom, as far as I know, the current planning regulations strongly encourage developers to do so, to deliver some community benefits. This is a recommendation that is made explicitly in the regulations. Now, it is a recommendation, so they could always not doing that, but the government has announced that both the governments, the United Kingdom government and the Scottish government, they have announced that if they will see that the developers don't comply with this recommendation, they will make a mandatory provision for developers to deliver these community benefits. So I think that as the British government is considering that, other countries have already gone through that route. If I'm not mistaken, for example, both Spain and Germany have a system of local taxation of wind farm developments, renewable energy developments, more in general, that benefits the local community. So there are ways to channel the economic revenue, at least to some extent, to the local community, and I think it's a good idea to do so. And well, if developers don't willingly do that, I think it's the time for policymakers to step in and take the initiative and make that mandatory. On the other issue that you mentioned, yes, I think it is a very important issue. What can we do for those socially disadvantaged communities where many individuals are not able to invest in a local cooperative? Well, I think that, for example, even that in that case, the laws and regulations could step in and make mandatory for example, for commercial developers developing a wind farm in a disadvantaged community, marginalized community, to donate to a community trust a share of the ownership of the development. And I think that instead the community cooperative scheme could be more successfully applied in those middle upper income communities where people have resources to invest in a local community. So I think that we can establish some policy strategies and differentiating between different communities. And I think this needs to be done if we want to promote a just transition, because when we think about the energy system that we had in the past, with fossil fuel plants or nuclear power plants, which most often were based close to disadvantaged communities who didn't have the voice to oppose them. We know that that system, which has been heavily criticized by environmental justice scholars, for example, Professor Ballard in the US, they are systems that we are not willing to replicate if we want to have a just energy transition. So it makes sense for policymakers to intervene, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that regulatory tools will become a lot more important in the future, especially in Norway, as it has seemingly been quite a free-for-all for development of wind energy, which has perhaps a lot of the blame for the current situation we're in now, where it has been sort of a backsliding of acceptance. Let's see, I had some more questions. Yes, I can't remember the exact name of the theory, but it says that the resistance towards wind energy follows a U-shaped curve. And as you also mentioned in your presentation, that co-op or cooperative systems can lead to a longer lasting resistance towards wind energy, and that it will split the community. Do you think there is some way to lessen the risk of this happening, to sort of have the community be able to unify despite perhaps having different opinions when it comes to development of wind energy? Or is it more of a...
Well, I think that a cooperative scheme should be proposed since the start of the project. So it should be socialized immediately, and it should come together with a community fund that is aimed at the whole community, respectively from individual citizens joining or not the cooperative scheme. So the two schemes can coexist, actually, so that if some people don't join the cooperative scheme, they can at least benefit from the community fund. And I think that building trust through community meetings, explaining what the cooperative is, what are the long-term benefits of the cooperative, because something that has been pointed at by the proponents of the cooperative scheme model, like the organization Energy for All, which is based in the United Kingdom, is that the cooperatives, wind farm cooperatives, can become experiences that are able to engage the community in future sustainable energy projects, so or environmental projects more in general. So there is possibly also benefit of the cooperative in the long term in terms of creating a community structure that might benefit long term the community. So that's why there was also this interest that I had when I carried out the survey in whether people thought that there could have been an increase in social capital in the community. And I think that as there is a potential of divide, there is also a potential of delivering a good number of benefits. But what is very important to reduce as much as possible the risk of creating a deep divide is really socializing from the start to this project and explaining it and making sure that even those that decide not to contribute at least can benefit in terms of a community fund for the whole community by the presence of the wind farm.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That was all my questions. I guess you can open it up to a more public question round now.
Yes, great.